Heard a joke once. Man goes to a doctor, says he's depressed, says life seems harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go see him. That should pick you up. The man bursts into tears, says, "But doctor, I am Pagliacci." Roll on the snare drum, everybody laughs, curtains drop. It's always interesting to me when I hear that joke because I think that it underlies a very simple problem with the world. And the problem is that there's a problem. There's something wrong with the world, and too often we don't acknowledge it. Because if you don't acknowledge something, then you don't have to deal with it. It's like when the check engine light comes on in your car, and instead of going to get it looked at, you just kind of see it there until it gets really annoying and you don't know what's going on. And maybe you put a piece of tape over it, or you color in with like black marker so you can't see it. Or my personal favorite is the first time you hear your brakes squeal and you're not quite sure what it was, and then all of a sudden the next day you hear that like grinding noise. We don't like to deal with problems until they become big problems, and the problem with that is when we deal with them as bigger problems, they are, well, bigger problems. If you have a problem and it's there, it's still there. It doesn't matter if you ignore it. And in our joke this morning, the problem that the man has is that he's sad. Feeling scared in a scary world. Things are uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There's hurt and there's lament. I oftentimes wonder why it is that we bottle up our own individual hurts, the things that harm us. And perhaps it's because we don't feel like we should take up space. You know, if this is going on and I need support, then I'm draining a resource from somebody else. And if I'm draining a resource from somebody else, well, that's not good. I'm supposed to be self-sufficient. So I'll just put on a happy face and wear this mask and everything will be fine and Jim dandy. Maybe we just don't want to bother people. Lord knows there's a social stigma against being sad. One of my favorite things that people say is, "Oh, just be happy. I'm cured. Go for a walk. Awesome, I'm sad outside now." That's what winds up happening. Or my personal favorite, "Oh, come on, be a man." Fellas, we're not allowed to be sad. Did you know that? That's what we hear. The problem is the man in the joke is sad, and the response that he gets given is to go see someone that makes people happy. Go see the clown. Go see the person that, no matter what is going on in the world, will make you laugh. And if you're laughing, then your brain releases certain chemicals and you feel happy and everything is fine and Jim dandy, except for the small problem that the sad man is the one who is supposed to make people happy. He's supposed to work for the others, to make sure that they have all of the happiness and the joy that they have. And it brings about the question, what about him? How is he supposed to get the help that he needs? Who's going to help him? It's kind of a similar state that Jeremiah finds himself in our Old Testament passage this morning. The book of Jeremiah is one of the hardest prophet books to read, not only because it's kind of anachronistic and things happen out of order, but, oh, it's sad. It's very, very hard to read. And I know sometimes we like a sad story, right? Like people like the movie and the book, The Notebook, or we think about that song at Christmas time, like The Christmas Shoes, and all of these different things that touch us and kind of make us feel sad, but only for a moment, because again, we don't like to be sad. But in Jeremiah's world, oh boy, I refer to him often as my favorite sad boy prophet because that's what he is. And this passage that we read illustrates one word: pain. Jeremiah was a person, by all accounts, who did everything that he was supposed to do. He was the one, before I knew you in the womb, I had plans for you. That was what he was told. This was always going to be his lot in life. He was called and marked before birth to be a prophet for God. And so he did that. He did everything he was supposed to do. He followed what it was that God wanted him to do, to the point where it almost cost him his life numerous times, to the point where true psychological trauma had been happening to him. People were threatening to kill him, all because he was doing the very thing that he was supposed to do. His reward for doing the right thing was pain. He's lamenting in this passage, and the lament should hurt us. Lament is something that should stop and make us feel something in general. It should hit us on this very real, very visceral level, because this passage is a cry of pain. This passage is one of sadness. And it's not just that he's lamenting for himself, because it's easy to do that. And one of the things we tell people who deal with depression and sadness is everyone has something that they're going through. True, but I'm not everyone, we think to ourselves. I'm allowed to feel my pain and sadness as well. And Jeremiah is not just feeling his pain and his sadness for his state. No, he is lamenting in a very similar way for his people. When this lament is written, the people are in exile. They are in pain. They are cut off from the land. They are cut off from their God. They are not in Jerusalem. And they all feel sad and alone and cast off from their homes. There is no way that they can commune with their God, because God only lives in the temple, and we're really far away. And it hurts them. And it makes them sad because they know and understand what they're going through, because they feel it. And not only is Jeremiah going through that also, not only is Jeremiah dealing with all of his own personal issues, but he looks at his people and they hurt and he hurts because of it. Empathy is wonderful. Empathy is a very great skill that people can develop. There are some dangers with it, because you don't want to discount and take all of another person's emotions and make them all of yours, because that discounts what they're going through. But empathy in and of itself, when used correctly, is a very useful and vital tool. But the problem with empathy is it hurts sometimes. When someone that you care deeply about is hurting, it hurts you because you care about them. So not only is Jeremiah dealing with all of his own things that he is going through, he is going through the fact that his people, the ones he is called to lead and shepherd, are in pain. There is no relief in sight. There is no doctor with a healing balm that can help them. How could there be? Things are at their worst, and he knows they're not going to get better anytime soon, because at one point he tells the people, hunker down, because this is your life now. Buy fields, buy farms, give your sons in marriage, all of that stuff. You guys are in it for the long haul, and that's not something that people want to hear. They don't want to hear, oh, this is an extended hard period for you. So all that he can do is weep. Cry out in pain, acknowledge the pain. That's it. That's all he can do. There are no words of comfort that he offers in this passage. It is one simply of pain and sadness. There is an acknowledgement of the fact that the people have put themselves in their current situation. There is this acknowledgement that the people have sinned egregiously against God, and because of that, there are consequences, action, consequence, natural rule of the universe that we understand. And you have to wonder, though, does that help? I mean, Jeremiah at this point is basically being a commiserator in pain and ministry. And we usually think what misery loves company, but does having a partner to commiserate in pain help with anything? I would say, yeah, I think that it does help. In a way, I think that it is helpful because it helps when we can identify in our pain with people who understand it. I realized very early on in my foster parent journey that if I were to talk to my parents or my friends who were not foster parents, they didn't get it. They didn't understand like the frustration or the pain or the joys that sometimes happen. They had no frame of reference for it. And thank the Lord, I had a very good friend who was walking that journey and got it and understood. And I was able to talk to him and speak to these things about all of that. It's good to have someone that you can talk to that gets your pain and understands it, but we have to be aware that simply commiserating together doesn't help solve the problem long term. Being stuck in a rut is good until you realize you're still in the rut. It does, however, help us to understand that though we feel isolated by our fear and by our pain, we're not as isolated as we are. We're not alone. And weirdly enough, when you're in pain, when you are hurt, when you see something that is a problem that is wrong with the world, this sort of acts as a reality check. If you were to wake up tomorrow morning with a very sharp pain in your foot, you would probably not call the cardiologist. I mean, they may know something about basic medicine, but they wouldn't necessarily know and understand the intricacies of the human foot. You would need to go to a specialist about that. And the only way that you know to do that is because your foot is hurting. The only way that you know there might be a problem with the engine in the car is the check engine lights. When the brakes squeal or start to grind a little bit, then you know you have to take it to get it looked at. Pain is an indication that there is something wrong. Is that helpful? Yes and no. It's helpful because you know that there's a problem, but it's not helpful because you're still in pain. You still have a problem to deal with. But once you know that there is a problem and have identified that there is an issue, then you can work towards fixing it. And that's what we need at times. The reality check of how the world works and what we are going through and why. Jeremiah is not minimizing his own pain or the pain of his people. He is saying, this hurts, and here is the cause from it. Here is why this is happening. One of the nice things about Jesus is that he offers this as well, just slightly different. See, the reading from Luke this morning is very, very odd, to say the least. When I was preparing this sermon and looked at the lectionary, I just thought, oh boy, We're at that today. And then you look at the Old Testament and you're like, oh boy, that's a tough one. Because everyone loves the happy parts. And we don't necessarily like to acknowledge the pain. This odd passage from Jesus in Luke this morning seems like Jesus is calling the disciples to be dishonest. And he even tells them at one point, make friends by dishonest means. Because when you do that, then you'll have friends that will help you out later. And that is the way the world works. Quid pro quo. I scratch your back, you scratch my back, take a little off the top, slide it under the table, whatever you want to call it. That is how the world often functions. I can't help but wonder how that would make us feel. Hearing Jesus, Christ, tell us to be dishonest. After all, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And what you wind up with is the fact that Jesus is the truth. And if Jesus is the truth, but he is telling us to be dishonest, then we either have to be dishonest or we're left in this moral quandary wondering if truth can be dishonest. And logically, the answer to that is no. The truth cannot be dishonest. However, there is something else going on here. There's this silent audience that's not addressed. It's like when you're talking to somebody and you're really trying to get someone else to hear over here. This is one of my favorite dad things. Like if I have a child who's upset and kind of acting a fool and another child is like, Dad, why aren't you doing something? I will look directly at them, make sure the other is in earshot and say, we don't acknowledge the behavior and we don't reward the behavior. Because if we do that, we are giving them license to continue the behavior. Just completely ignoring them while talking to them at the same time. And this is actually what Jesus is doing here. See, Luke 15 has Jesus being listened to by the Pharisees and the tax collectors. And we find ourselves in Luke 16. He's still in that space, in that bubble. And that was when Jesus was talking about finding things, what we talked about last week. And then he launches into the parable of the prodigal son, and we know that one as well, telling all of this about, how the prodigal son lived his life, and all of this is directed at them, the sinners, the tax collectors, the Pharisees, all of that. And then suddenly, in chapter 16, there is this decided shift over to the disciples, and he starts talking to the disciples, but they didn't leave. They're still there. He ignores them and he addresses the disciples directly and gives them advice that is not only counterintuitive, but almost counter to everything that he had just said. Be dishonest, be full of guile, and be cunning, be clever. If we look at it in the cultural context, the guy was already thought to be dishonest. He was getting fired for his job. He wasn't doing what it was that he needed to do. And so because of this, he was going to be fired. He's going to lose his job. He'd have to become a slave. And he's like, I don't have the skills to do anything else. And so he was thought of as being dishonest in and of himself, simply because of who he was. He was a slave to the other guy. Excuse me. Thank you. In the midst of all of that, he realizes that he has to do something to safeguard his own self. He's like, I'm not strong enough to work. I'm not strong enough. I'm too proud to beg, he says. And so he's like, I'm going to make friends and influence people. And he does that by slashing interest rates. So a guy owes 100 jars of olive oil. And he says, shut up, make it 50, do it now and pay that. The guy with the wheat, I owe 100 wheat. Shut up, make it 80 and pay it now. That's what he does. And so what happens is when he's dismissed by the manager, then he's able to go to them and say, hey, I helped you out. I'm cashing in that favor. I have helped you, therefore you can help me. By being in virtue of who he was dishonest. And then Jesus says, be cunning, be dishonest. And the Pharisees and certain people were probably agreeing with all of that. They're standing there, shaking their heads. Yes, that makes sense. Do that. That is perfect advice. You have to be cunning. You have to be quick-witted. You have to outsmart your opponent at every single chance that you get. You have to make yourself succeed at all costs. It does not matter who you step on. Use your politics, win friends, influence people with the understanding that you need them at times. Be underhanded if you need to. Grease palms, rub elbows, whatever it is that you have to do, do it, because if you ain't first, you're last. And Jesus knows they're hearing because he wants them to hear, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, what happens? He flips the script. Whoever is faithful in very little is faithful in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest in much. And if you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with the real wealth? And he caught them. And he wasn't trying to call them out. He wasn't calling them a brood of vipers or anything like that. But as they're listening and agreeing with him, when he flips the script and tells them, no, don't do that because that's how the world operates, they have to stop and think and say, am I wrong? Is what I'm doing wrong? It's this reality check. No, you shouldn't be dishonest. That's logical. The point of all of this is simple, though. If you can't be faithful being dishonest, then why would you think you can be faithful being honest? You can't be focused on only yourself and what you want, that you sacrifice your relationship with God. The fact of the matter is, dishonest times breed dishonest people. And he doesn't do this in a mean way. He doesn't directly call them out. It's just, this is, like, he tells the story. He's like, this is wrong. You can't serve two masters. It's not possible. So you have to figure out where your allegiances lie, where your loyalties actually lie with people. It would be lovely and nice to think that at least some of the Pharisees got it. And I think that stories such as Nicodemus kind of show that that is the case. That they understood what was going on, because Nicodemus was a Pharisee who went to Jesus and was like, look, we get it. We know that you come from God. There are people that get it when Jesus talks, and that's a good thing. And all Jesus is doing here is being brutally honest. He's attempting to show the people that he is able to identify with them, that he understands what it is that they go through, that he knows how the world works, and that they are not alone in that. And that is the thing. That's the point. That's what you need when the world seems like it's a mess, is that you need someone who is there. Whenever someone is upset, I try to think it through, but then I also try to ask them, because sometimes my gut reaction says, help, help, help right now, and sometimes that's not what people need. So sometimes what I offer is, I'm like, do you need an ear or do you need a solution? The solution is that I say, well, this is how I think things should happen. This is what I think is going on, blah, 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 all that other stuff. The ear, I will just simply say, that's rough, buddy. I'm sorry. And just listen. Because honestly, sometimes that's all that people need, is just to have their voice heard and to listen. And that is what Jesus is trying to do here. He's trying to show them that no, they're not alone. Let's be real and honest here. It is not fun. It is not fun to be a commiserator. Nobody likes to be with a Debbie Downer. And nobody likes to acknowledge the things that are wrong. Because when you admit that your foot is hurting, then you have to do something about it. And that's the problem. You can't heal a hurt that you don't know is there. And to do that, we need to properly grieve. We need to acknowledge the actual state of the world, that we live in a world sometimes that has decided which master they're going to serve. But we also need to admit the state of ourselves. We need to acknowledge the things that hurt us, that harm us, that bind us, that prevent us from being who it is that God wants us to be. And yet when we do that, there is a hope. And we can realize that we are not alone. Not only are we not alone in the sense that, we have people in our lives that can help, that can get it and understand these things that we are going through. But here is the thing, Jesus knows as well. Jesus shows that he understands the state of the world, and if Jesus understands the state of the world, he certainly then would understand what it is that we are going through. It hurts to acknowledge the pain, the problems that we have in the world. But the good news is that there is a balm in Gilead. That God is gracious enough to walk with us and to heal the hurts that we have. All we need to do is to trust in God, take God at God's word, and to allow ourselves to grieve, to lament, and to walk with God. One of the most profound things I've ever heard from seminary was a great Scottish guy, like bow tie, everything, thick Scottish accent, said, "We've lost the ability to lament and grieve. We don't lament anything. We hold everything in. And there are times when it's okay to say, God, I'm mad and I am upset and I am hurt. And you can be angry with God because that's okay, because God's a big boy and can take care of himself." So when you're done being mad, when you get it all out of your system, what happens is God is still standing there saying, "You good now? Right. Good. Let's fix this." We just have to trust in the God that can heal all hurts that we have. Amen.